Welcome to Joy in Our Town. I'm Jackie Phillips, and our issue today is housing, and we're learning about the renting and buying in New York City. We're joined by licensed associate real estate broker and two-time Rubney Award winner, Pasquale Strippoli. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jackie, for having me.
So you must be very busy as a real estate associate.
I have been, yes. Yes.
What does the housing market look like in New York City?
Well, Jackie, that's a question that has been often asked to me in my private and personal circles. And my answer is invariably the same. It depends on what side of the negotiating table you find yourself on. For example, if you're an owner of property looking to sell your property, whether it be one property, or if you're a developer developing a condominium and you're selling 250 units, you're on the best side of the negotiating table because the market is very strong. The same for rentals. If you own a property and you're looking to rent it out, or if, again, you're a developer developing a rental building with 300 units in it, you're on the best side of the negotiating table. If you're looking to purchase, if you're looking to rent, you certainly don't have the upper hand because prices are at an all-time high.
Is it more rentals or sales in New York City?
That's a good question. In New York City, 66% of the stock market, 66% approximately of the housing that exists in Manhattan are rentals, whereas 22 to 23% of the housing market in Manhattan are condominium. The rest, 12 to 13%, are co-ops. So you can clearly see there's a disparagement, whereas approximately 2/3 of the Manhattan housing stock is rental, and 1/3 are buildings where you can potentially own in. So there's certainly a shortage for housing for sale.
Are there enough apartments in New York City?
You know, based on the data that I've just given you, there are enough apartments, but certainly not enough apartments for sale.
Talk to us about what is the process of renting an apartment in New York City? What does that look like?
Well, the process hasn't really changed since the inception.
Meaning?
Meaning, when you're looking to rent an apartment in New York City, one should be prepared. And so any landlord given an application to a prospective renter, in the application, you fill out your name, your address, your social security number. They run your credit. The next piece of information that's required is a letter of employment. And in some cases, if you're renting in a co-op or a cooperative, you have board packages. A board package in a cooperative or a condominium has much more requirements, such as tax returns, not all in every case, but you have letters of reference, personal reference letters, business reference letters, landlord reference letters. So the process of renting in Manhattan can be quite arduous depending on where you're renting in.
What are the lease terms of renting? Is New York City very different kind of a market than the rest of the country, or is it pretty much standard?
Your standard, or rather typical lease term, is 1 to 2 years, although that will vary. For example, in the diplomatic community, people that are here from foreign countries working for the United Nations, they're here for 3 to 4 years. So unless they find a property in a rental building by which they can renew after 1 or 2 years, if they find a property that suits their needs in a condominium, oftentimes a lease will be negotiated for 4 years. So a lease will start out, let's say, with 1 or 2 years, and in the rider of a lease, typically done and negotiated by a broker, the rider will state that the renter has the right to renew for a 3rd year at X amount of increase and a 4th year. So there are variations to the typical 1 and 2 year lease terms in New York City.
Now, what about in a co-op? Because I know a co-op is different than a condominium. Do they allow a tenant to rent more than 2 years, or is it different?
It varies. Typically in co-ops, an owner of a cooperative apartment can rent 2 years out of every 5.
Okay.
They must live there for the first 2 years in most cases.
Okay.
Many co-ops will only give a 1-year lease at a time. And so there are very strong restrictions in renting in a co-op.
Why is that?
Well, in a co-op, it's a corporation. And so co-ops are designed for ownership. Most co-ops, you'll find the board of directors want to keep the majority of the tenants, or rather residents, owners.
How should someone prepare themselves to rent in New York City? What are some things they should do?
Well, it's quite an arduous process for someone that's renting for the first time, even for the second time. So the first thing one might do is to, if you can't afford a real estate broker, okay, the first thing that's required is a letter of employment. So one should gather their letter of employment, and a letter of employment is from their employer, which simply states their name, their title, their duration, and most of all, their income. This is what landlords want to know. Can this person afford the rent?
Yes.
In addition to that, it's also wise to obtain a letter from your landlord, a reference letter. And that reference letter is a very simple letter. So say, for example, you're applying for a rental. Your landlord would write you a reference letter. Jackie Phillips has been my tenant for 3 years. She's been lovely. She's paid the rent on time. I highly recommend her for residency in your building.
What if this is your first time renting and you don't have that recommendation from a landlord? Then what to do?
There's ways around that. Again, the criterion for renting an apartment for a landlord is based simply on 2 items.
Money.
Money. You have to have money.
Yes.
Yes. And the sufficient amount of money. So you have to qualify yourself according to the landlord standard, the amount of money you make.
Is it true that landlords ask for 40 times the rent?
Yes, that's the typical standard. In this market, we're experiencing for many years now a very strong rental market. So there are cases where some major landlords have upped that ante to 45, even 50 times the rent.
So if apartment was $2,000 a month, then that person needs to make $80,000 or more a year, depending on the landlord.
Correct.
Wow. That's hard if you're just getting out of school, I would think.
Absolutely.
What is the number and why is that?
Well, the number is because people have other expenses. So if you're applying for a $2,000 apartment and you make $80,000 a year and you have a car loan, you have a child that you're supporting. Student loans, you have to eat. In many cases, you have a car. You know, there's transportation costs.
Medical insurance. Yeah.
And so on. Clothing to buy, you know, your typical money needed to live.
Incidentals.
Absolutely.
Now, how long does the renting process typically take in New York City? So from start to finish, what should a person expect?
Well, assuming one identifies a property quickly, or whenever a person identifies a property quickly, they see something, this is where I want to live. The process can take literally hours, a day or two, or upwards of 30 days, sometimes more.
Wow.
Depending on the type of property they're applying for. For example, if you're applying in a rental building, such as any given high-rise in Manhattan, or anywhere in New York City, a lot of these rental buildings, if not all of them, they have what's called on-site agents. So you walk in yourself or with a broker. You fill out their application. They'll ask you for a letter of employment, in many cases, a bank statement. So it's incumbent upon the renter to supply that information. If that information is readily available, you fill out the application, you submit your letter of employment, they run your credit, you submit your bank statement, you can be approved within 2 hours.
So let's talk about, going off of that, what's the difference between renting and buying? How is that process different?
Well, first of all, buying, there's financing involved. So in rentals, one should be prepared to have cash in hand to write the checks for the rent and security. That's not necessarily the case in the beginning of the process for purchasing. Again, purchasing, in many cases, there's financing involved. So the difference is identifying whether someone wants to live in a condominium or a co-op.
And what is the difference? Which is preferred?
Which is preferred? Clearly condominium because of its ease of ownership.
Now, if you have to have 40 times your income to rent, what do you have to buy? I know that there's variations of purchase price, but what is typical? Is it 20% down, 10% because you're a first-time buyer? What are the rules?
Well, since the recession of 2008 and 2009, the banks have become more conservative. So the standard before 2008 in condominiums, many purchases were had with 10% down.
Okay.
Now, many buildings are becoming more conservative along with the bank and may require 20% down.
Or even 30,
in
I've
many
heard.
cases.
Yes. Now, what would you say are some tips? What are some tips if you're going to start this arduous process of renting in New York City?
Well, some tips are first of all, identify the location you want to live in. If you have children, that would require looking into what schools you want your children to go to. If you don't have children, it's equally important to identify what neighborhood would you like to live in. Once you identify that neighborhood and you engage with a real estate professional, the tips would be to have all of your documents in hand, such as a letter of employment, if possible, a letter of recommendation from your landlord. It would be wise, there are several websites out there that you can run your own credit for free and it doesn't take any points off of your credit rating. So it's very important to know what your credit standing is, what your rating is.
How would that help you then? If you go in prepared, it's going to speed the process up?
Absolutely.
I see. Well, we're going to continue our conversation about housing when we return after these messages with Mr. Strippoli. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Look, here's a charge for something we didn't order.
Good catch.
I don't think you should ever pay for any bill unless you have first made sure that all the charges are correct.
Speaking of which, have you heard of the latest Medicare scams? This happened to my friend. A man came to her door claiming he was from Medicare. He had a smooth line about helping seniors with the high cost of their medicines, but she had to give him her Medicare number right then before the deadline. Well, when she got her Medicare summary notice, it was full of charges for services she hadn't received. Turns out this guy was a scam artist.
Medicare already has everyone's number. They wouldn't need to ask for it.
Scams like these hurt every taxpayer, draining billions from Medicare and making it harder for people like us to get the health benefits we're entitled to. So I did something about it. I joined the Senior Medicare Patrol, where I work with other volunteers to teach my neighbors how to protect their Medicare numbers, review statements to spot false charges and detect errors, and report suspected fraud.
Mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at 58 years old.
8 years into the disease was when all the light went out.
For me, it was heart-wrenching.
Looking into the eyes of somebody with Alzheimer's, sometimes you just don't see the person's soul is like gone.
And it takes a toll on everyone. I mean, it's a depressing disease to watch unfold before your eyes.
She actually thought those of us who were caring for her and who loved her most were her worst enemies.
More and more responsibilities fell on my shoulders.
This disease just ravages a family.
It changes your life.
The magnitude of it is indescribable. My mother taught me to be in the moment.
We have to live in the moment with them.
And I'm going to be with that person right now in this moment, wherever she is.
Now is the moment. If we work together, we can stop this epidemic.
Contact Bright Focus and learn more.
Welcome back to Joy in Our Town. I'm your host, Jackie Phillips, and our issue is housing. But in this segment, we are going to learn rental scams in New York City. We are continuing our conversation with licensed associate real estate broker, two-time Rebney Award winner, Pasquale Strippoli. So, Pasquale.
Hello, Jackie.
Hello. Tell us about real estate scams. I mean, are they different in New York City than they are in different parts of the country?
Absolutely not.
No.
When we talk about real estate scam, the term scammer often is the most common word used. I like to use the word predator because the predator is predicating on someone's weakness or vulnerability. For example, there's another segment of society, a very evil segment of society, where you have a 65-year-old gentleman behind a computer screen talking to, let's say, a 15-year-old. And that 15-year-old thinks that this 65-year-old is also 16 or 15 years old. It's a lie. Back from my digression, in a rental real estate scam, it's the same. It's predicated upon one lie.
What are the different scams that happen? Explain to us the variations of scams, please.
There's really one rental real estate scam, and it's predicated upon the price of an apartment. There are different ways to execute the scam. For example, if you're looking for a two-bedroom apartment in Williamsburg, and your budget is $1,800 a month, or even better, $1,500 a month, you will quickly find out that that is impossible to find. You know, the statistics show by a very popular real estate website that all the brokers use and much of the public use, the median price for rental asking rental prices in Manhattan is $3,400 a month.
For a two-bedroom or a one-bedroom?
No, the median asking price in Manhattan is $3,400, and in Brooklyn, the median asking price is $2,600.
I see.
That's a 3% increase in Manhattan over 2014 and a 4% increase in Brooklyn over 2014. So when you look at those numbers, it's easy to understand that even for a studio apartment, the days of finding a studio apartment in New York City, depending on the location, unless you're way out in Manhattan, way out in the boondocks of New York City, you're not going to find a $900 studio.
On a boat.
Yes.
Kidding.
Absolutely.
Now, is using the internet to find housing in New York City a big reason for all these internet scams?
100% yes.
Yes.
Because the predator is able to hide behind the computer. And so the difference in the scams go like this. You're looking for 2 weeks for a property for $1,500, a two-bedroom in Williamsburg. And that property should really be $4,000, $5,000 a month, maybe if you're lucky, $3,500 a month. So you're looking and you're frustrated, a week or two goes by, and all of a sudden, you're on the internet, and lo and behold, you see something, two-bedroom, two-bath, park slope, beautiful exposure, terrace, washer, dryer. So after your heart stops palpitating and you wipe the sweat off the palms of your hand, put your eyes back in your socket, you can't wait to respond to that ad. And that's where the catch is in the price. And so, again, there are different ways of executing a real estate scam.
How do they continue the scam? Do they say, oh, so many people want this property, let's do a PayPal deposit and hold it really quick for you?
Yes, but I wouldn't say PayPal, because with PayPal you have registration by both users. So you can easily identify who the scammer or the predator is.
So there's different ways to scam. Do these scammers take deposits for checks?
They usually ask for cash or a wire transfer.
Oh, I see, because then it's not traceable.
Right.
How can one avoid a real estate scam?
Talking to people.
Okay.
There's an adage, an old adage is saying that will remain true for the rest of time. If it's too good to be true, it is too good to be true.
It is too good to be true.
No one is giving away property for free.
Pasquale, I have to agree with you. Now, how can you protect yourself from real estate scams if you choose to search on your own without a broker or can't afford a broker or using the internet?
Okay. Well, no doubt in today's day and age, everyone is using the internet.
Most people.
Most people.
Yeah.
Yes.
My mom does not use the internet.
Right. But scammers often won't print an ad because then again, they have to reveal their identity. So it's always over the internet. Internet is free. You can you can reinvent yourself on the internet, much like social media. You put your best picture up, you can put a fake name.
Yes.
And so the best way to protect yourself is to remember, it's too good to be true. So asking questions like, this is very important for the people to know. You find an ad, $1,500 for a 2-bedroom on Gramercy Park. $1,500, oh my God, my prayers are answered. That's what I'm looking for. How do you know if that's a real rental, legitimate property? You can go on nyc.gov. You can put in the address of the property. By doing that, you can, in almost all cases, find out who the landlord or the managing agent is. You pick up the phone call. You say, hi, my name is Jackie. My name is Pasquale. I saw an apartment in a building that I see you own and manage, and the gentleman or the person I met is offering this particular apartment for $1,500 a month. Well, you might be surprised to find out, no, Mrs. Schwartz has been living there for 33 years, and that apartment isn't for rent, and if it was, it would be $4,000 a month.
Or 15,000, it was a typo.
Right, exactly.
Should you be on guard if your future landlord asks to be paid in cashier's checks?
Quite the opposite.
No.
No. The standard or the most typical way to close a deal on a rental transaction is almost, and I never like to say all, but for the purposes of the public understanding, in almost all cases, when you're applying for an apartment and you're approved, the first thing that's required is the first month's rent and the security deposit in a bank-certified check. Even if you're already living in one building and transferring to another apartment in the building, that is the typical standard, certified checks.
Can you be a victim of a scam while renting, or are they all scams pre-move-in?
Both are correct. All scams are perpetrated in the beginning pre-move-in. But there have been many cases where someone is living in an apartment for 6 weeks, 6 months, or a year, and all of a sudden they get a letter in the mail from the attorney of the landlord, you're illegally subletting. They didn't know that it was an illegal sublet. It may not have been a scam necessarily, but in New York City, if you own an apartment in a condo, in a co-op, or in a rental building and you're subleasing,
Or rent stabilized also.
also rent stabilized.
You have to exist in it.
Yes, you need the permission from the landlord. And by doing so, there's paperwork to fill out, and the primary landlord is the one that approves the subtenant. So if I rent an apartment and I want to sublet it to you for a year, I can't just write you a lease. We have to go together to my managing agent, the landlord. You fill out the proper paperwork with the same information as has been aforementioned, and the landlord approves of that sublet. So in many cases, you'll find that a tenant who's been living in an apartment for a year, 2 years, 10 years, they'll put an ad out on the internet, I'm subletting my apartment. They'll pull on your heartstrings. Oh, Jackie, that was my niece's name. I love that name. Completely out of context for a real estate deal.
I would fall for it.
Yeah, and so you meet the person, they present you a lease or a document, or they might even go so far as to say, oh, I trust you. Just pay me the rent. Years ago, I was a victim of that before I was a real estate broker.
How did that happen?
I went to an agency looking for a roommate situation. I couldn't afford at the time, and we're talking 29 years ago. I went to an agency, it was a legitimate agency, found the place. Long story short, I'm living in a 1-bedroom apartment with this woman. 3 months later, she says to me, oh, Pasquale, me and my boyfriend are moving to Florida. You can take over the apartment and find your own roommate. I was young, naive. Okay, she gives me a stack of envelopes, pre-written and prepaid to the landlord. Long story short, I found a roommate. 6 months later, we receive a certified letter in the mail from the attorney of the owner of the building. This particular person who had the rent-controlled lease, it was a lease that was $292 a month. Me and my roommate were paying, at the time, $1,000 a month, right here on West 4th Street in Greenwich Village. He gave us the mandate, you have to be out by the end of the month. Now here is a very important piece of information. A landlord could not mandate that you move out at the end of the month. The landlord, if he finds that he has an illegal tenant or an illegal sublet in his apartment, must go through the courts. You cannot say you can say you have to be out, but I didn't know better. You have to go through the court system for an eviction process.
And how long does that take, Pasquale?
An eviction process in New York City can take upwards of 9 months.
Wow. So at least it gives you time to find another place
Yes.
if you are a victim.
Absolutely.
What is a rent-stabilized apartment? What does that mean for the viewers that have no idea what we're talking about?
A rent-stabilized apartment, every year in Albany, they vote on the percentage of increase, whether it's a 1-year lease or a 2-year lease. And a rent-stabilized apartment is either a 1 or a 2-year lease. And so the landlord, once the rent is established, so let's say you're paying $1,500 a month on your rent-stabilized apartment, and typically it'll be $1,529.11. Your renewal, once voted upon in Albany, and let's say the increase, for example, this year, it was voted 0% increase for a 1-year lease, which has never happened, and 2% increase for a 2-year lease.
Wow. Before we wrap up, is there anything that can be done when you have been a victim of real estate scam in the next minute? What would your tips be?
Well, you can never get your money back. I like to never say never, but chances are you'll never get your money back. But what you can do is, there's a website called stopfraud.gov. It's chaired by the Attorney General. You could make a report that you were scammed, and that website will give someone a plethora of information on all types of scams and how to avoid scams. The second thing you do to inform the public is you can file a report with the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. And the internet site that you found that ad on where you were scammed, take out an ad yourself to protect the public. I've been a victim of a scam. Beware of this address or of this person. They took me for $1,500 or however much it was. The best thing you can do going forward is to protect the public. But getting your money back, it's probably not going to happen.
And I liked your advice. If it's too good to be true, it is, and to talk to people, because that is how you're really going to get answers.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. This was wonderful, wonderful information.
Thank you, Jackie.
You were a terrific guest.
Thank you, Jackie.
And thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.
This program has been sponsored by the Trinity Broadcasting Network and is made possible by your telethon dollars. Your continual support can keep Joy in Our Town coming to your home every week. Write to Joy in Our Town, Post Office Box A, Santa Ana, California, 92711.